Well, shalom, everyone, and welcome to our Shabbat Shalom service. It is Shabbat, February 16th, 2024, and we are excited about all that Jehovah is doing in the lives of his people. We thank him for this word that we're going to study on tonight, and we are just excited because we know that the Ruach HaKodesh will bring revelation of the word. And we are in season 4 of our studies. So we're listening to music right now, and we don't own the rights to the music. We just use it to get our hearts and minds ready to receive. So just listen to the music, shut out the cares of this world, and we're going to allow our spirit man to be fed on tonight. Once again, shalom, and thank you so much for joining me for our study of the Torah on tonight. We don't own the rights to the music, but it certainly gets our hearts, our minds ready to receive. All the Ruach HaKodesh will speak to us through this word on tonight. All right, so that is that. We have ended that. I'm going to shut this device off. And we are going to get ready for our study on tonight. Get ready for our shared screen. First, let's pray while we have the screen open, and then we will get into our shared screen. Jehovah our Elohim, we bless you for this day. This is the day that you have made. We rejoice and we're glad in it. We thank you for Shabbat, a day of rest, getting our mind and our focus on the creator of the universe and how he wished to dwell among his people. We welcome you, Ruach HaKodesh, to guide us through this study on tonight. We thank you for the revelatory knowledge of the word and how we can be empowered to not only be hearers, but doers of his word. Bless each one that's a part of this study, either tonight, tomorrow, whenever they choose to listen, and may the words of our mouth and the meditations of our heart be pleasing in thy sight. And it's in the name of Yeshua HaMashiach we pray. Amen. All right, with that, get our shared screen. And we're going to get this out the way, our imagery out the way, and we're going to get into our slideshow presentation. There we are. Now let's see what we can do over here to get this out the way. We don't know what's going on with this, but in any case, this is our Shabbat night service. This is Shabbat. We were encouraged to take this advantage of this gift that was set aside by the creator of the universe to be a blessing for his people. And so on this Shabbat night, February 16th, 2024, we are in lesson 19 of 52 lessons that will get us through the first 5 books of the Bible in 1 year. So we're going to be tonight in the lesson called Terumah. Terumah. which is offering. And we'll see that word in the part of the study that speaks of this. This whole study is about the offering that was taken up by Moshe for the building of the tabernacle. And so we want to make certain that everyone gets an opportunity to go through this lesson with us tonight. And it's not boring unless you only think of it as measurements and materials. But if you get into the heart of the study and allow the spirit man to speak, you're going to see the value of the information that we're getting from the Torah on tonight. I want to bring up, and as part of our introduction, we see that Jehovah gives Moses in this lesson on tonight detailed instructions on how to build a Mishkan, which is sanctuary or tabernacle, in English. But the Hebrew is Mishkan, so that it could travel with the children of Israel in the desert. All the objects in the Mishkan had rings attached, so poles could be put inside with which to carry the vessel. We have a little bit of an artistic depiction of what this is the holy place look like from on the outside with the skins and everything, the boards around it to make the frame of the building. And we see everything being tied off so that it would not move with the winds that were prone to come. We see the courtyard that goes around it, and we see those tent pegs being tied off so that there was a yard around the holy place. And we'll see even a bigger layout of it later on in our lesson. As we go through this lesson, we want to think about the answer to a question is, and it is fundamental, is why the tabernacle? And it's so that Jehovah Elohim, we know he doesn't live in buildings. The scriptures tell us in many places he doesn't live in buildings. But we do know he also lives in builders. So we know that the Ruach HaKodesh, which is the very presence of Jehovah, lives in the believers. And so therefore, it's the same set of information to give us more meaning into what is going on with this building of this Mishkan or this tabernacle. He lives not in structures of stone, but in the human heart and in our minds. So what the Jewish sages and mystics point out was that Jehovah says in this lesson, let them, in Hebrew translated, says, let them build me a sanctuary that I may dwell in them. And this them is different than not that I may dwell in it. So the whole concept of transferring this information to the temple of the body is being relayed in this wording that I may dwell in them. Some translations say that I may dwell among them. That is the life transforming secret in the name of the study, Terumah. It means a contribution or offering. Jehovah says to Moshe, tell the Israelites to take for me a terumah or contribution. You are to receive the contribution for me from everyone whose heart, whose heart prompts them to give. So now this is what we call a free will type offering, which is what all offerings should be, since everything comes from the creator of the universe. The best way of encountering Jehovah is to be a giver. So we should love to give. That's why Shaul told us that Jehovah loves a cheerful giver. It was Jehovah that prompted the hearts of the people to give. So he says, you take from me a voluntary contribution, and he would speak to the hearts of the people to then give what was being asked for. And we'll find out that there were 13 different things that were going to be required for the building of this Mishkan. It was Jehovah that prompted the hearts of the Egyptians to give. Remember when the children of Israel left Egypt on the night after the Passover? They had already been given everything they required from the Egyptians as partial payment for the many years of slavery that they had endured in the land of Egypt. And it was Jehovah that placed the picture in the mind of Moses. And later we'll read where he put it in the hearts and minds of all the craftsmen to do what they had not seen before. But Moses was shown an adaptation of it from the heavenlies, for which he was going to get the dimension, but he had a mental picture of what this was supposed to look like. The dimensions of the universe are precise, mathematically exact. Had they differed in even the slightest degree, the universe or life would not exist. And this is what science has began to understand. Only now are scientists beginning to realize how precise, and even this knowledge does not accurately depict the wisdom of creation. Every law in creation must exist in order for creation to exist. And even though it is revealed to us through our understanding and study of the word as to what we see, we always know that Jehovah has intention on purpose for everything in which he created. There is a precise choreography to the moral and spiritual life, as there is a precise architecture to the tabernacle. So one thing we always want to understand, and it is spoken of in the New Testament as it is not grievous to be obedient. Why? Because if the creator of the universe tells you what is best for you, that should not be a grievous thing for you to do. Why? Because he knows what is best. And therefore, what he says and tells us we should do are for our good. So being good, specifically being holy, is not a matter of acting as the Spirit moves us. It is a matter of aligning ourselves to the Creator that made the world. So we should not have to, there's a certain rhythm to the universe and the understanding of creation. And when we align ourselves with that, then we will do what? We will fulfill all that the Creator of the universe put in each one of us. Man was given the assignment of working in creation to bring forth all that is a part of us that was placed in us by Jehovah, our Creator. The tabernacle had to be built exactly as Jehovah had told Moses, and placed a picture of it in the mind of Moses and the craftsmen. So we want to remember that. And we'll see that it'll say they did all exactly as Moses had instructed. The tabernacle was the place that had rules, just as creation has rules. Jehovah rules his creation and his people, but we must choose to obey the rules. Remember, they are not difficult. They are not grievous. We are not sacrificing to be obedient. We are being obedient so we can live the fullest life that was intended for each of us to live. There is blessings for obedience and curses for disobedience or consequences. Moses told the people on many occasions to choose life and obedience. So that's kind of a backdrop as we get into this lesson, because we're going to be talking about materials and sizes of materials and all these things. But just as Moses was shown a picture and placed in his mind the picture of the heavenly tabernacle, so will the children of Israel have to build what they had not seen before, but were innately, in obedience to what they were told to do, they will unleash this beautiful edifice, this Mishkan, that Jehovah may dwell in and among his people. So, with that, let us get into our lesson for today. Exodus chapter 25, verse 1. We see in the right-hand corner a picture of what the Ark of the Covenant may have exactly like. Jehovah said to Moshe, verse 2, tell the people of Israel to take up a collection. That is that word, Terumah. Terumah, take up a collection for me. Accept a contribution. So once again, accept a Terumah from anyone who wholeheartedly wants to give. The contribution, the Terumah, you are to take from them is to consist of. Now we get into the different articles that the contribution was designed to fulfill. He says, let it consist of gold, silver, and bronze, blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, fine linen, goat's hair, tanned ram skins, and fine leather, acacia wood. Fascinating how they found acacia wood, but remember it came out of Egypt. And it's very possible they could have brought into Egypt with them the seeds for acacia trees to grow in Egypt in the land for which they were staying. And as this acacia wood would grow, which is very strong, then they would in fact plant more and more, and the people of Egypt would also want some of this wood. They're gonna have verse 6, oil for the light, spices for the anointing oil and for the fragrant incense, onyx stones and other stones to be set for the ritual vest and breastplate. They are to make me a sanctuary, says Jehovah, so that I might live among them. Remember, we are the temple of the Ruach HaKodesh. So that is the same concept as Jehovah living among them in this tabernacle. You are to make it according to everything I show you, the design of the tabernacle and the design of its furnishings. This is how you are to make it. They are to make an ark of acacia wood, 3 3/4 feet long, 2 1/4 feet wide, and 2 1/4 feet high. You are to overlay it with pure gold, overlay it both inside and outside, and put a molding of gold around the top of it. You see the molding of gold around the top and surrounding the cover as well as the ark itself. Remember now, this information was given to Moses while on top of the mountain for the 40 days. So he had ample time for Jehovah to place this information in his mind and to record it. We go on. He says, cast 4 gold rings for it and attach them to its 4 feet, 2 wings on each side, 2 rings on each side. Verse 13, make poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. Put the poles into the rings on the sides of the ark, as you see in this depiction. Excuse me. You will use them to carry the ark. The poles are to remain in the rings of the ark. They are not to be removed from it. So even when this is behind the curtain, inside the Holy of Holies, those poles, those poles would remain in there. And later we'll get into exactly how they would have to cover it. Wow, I don't know what's going on with this. I'm getting the hiccups from something. I'm not going to drink that. Maybe that's a little bit too cold. I'll drink something a little more room temperature. Then we go on. You ought to make a cover for the ark out of pure gold. Some translations say mercy seat. The Hebrew word means cover, which many translations use. There is no reason to call it the mercy seat from the Hebrew words that were translated. But when translations are occurring, I have no idea why these hiccups won't go. Now, this cover is to be 3 3/4 feet long and 2 1/4 feet high. You ought to make 2 cherubim or cherubims of gold. Make them of hammered work for the 2 ends of the ark cover. So in other words, this is going to be gold, a big block of gold from which this will be carved out. Not things put together, but one piece of gold from which this will be carved out. Make 1 cherub or cherub for one end and 1 cherub for the other end. Make the cherubim or cherubim of one piece with the ark cover at its 2 ends. The cherubim, and we're going to get into what that is, exactly what this would mean to the people is not clear. They have a face and wings, so artists have made depictions mostly of what we call angels. So it doesn't specify what these, it could look like a bird, but it had a human face and wings. So some depictions show angels, some show, since there was the face of a man, then it could not be, in fact, a bird with the face of a man. And so many different understandings of what this looked like, but what we're trying to understand is what it may have looked like in the minds of those who had to create what Jehovah had put in their mind to do. He goes on. Their faces are toward each other and toward the ark cover. So in other words, they're going to be looking towards each other in this kind of a position so that their wings are extended towards each other, but their faces, as they're even looking at each other, are bowing towards what this is, this ark of the covenant. You are to put the ark cover on top of the ark. There I will meet with you. In other words, we highlighted that is because when Moshe would go in the tent of meeting, then the voice would appear over or around these 2 cherubim, and Moses would hear what Jehovah wanted to instruct the people. He says, I will speak with you from above the ark cover, from between the 2 cherubim or cherubim, which are on the ark for the testimony, about all the orders I am giving you for the people of Israel. So we see that this place of meeting inside the holy place is where the presence of Jehovah would come to dwell among his people and speak to Moshe. So when Moses would come out and explain what Jehovah had said, the people understood what had transpired. Verse 23, you ought to make a table of acacia wood, 3 feet long, 18 inches wide, and 18 inches high. Overlay it with pure gold, and put a molding of gold around the top of it. We see that in our artist's depiction right here. Make around it a rim a handbreadth wide, and put a molding of gold around the rim. Make 4 gold rings for it. They're the gold rings that are going to, in fact, allow the acacia poles to go through. Make the poles of acacia wood. Overlay them with gold and use them to carry the table. Make its dishes, pans, bowls, and pitchers of pure gold. On the table you ought to place the bread of the presence in my presence always. So always inside the tabernacle, there was to be these 12, what we call loaves. And you see they're round like a pizza loaf, but that was what was called the 12 loaves. 6 in each pile, 1 for each one of the 12 tribes is basically the depiction of what was on the table of what is written in the translation, the table of showbread. Verse 31, you ought to make a menorah of pure gold. It is to be made of hammered work. Once again, you see this depiction of the menorah. It was from a big block of gold and carved out. So it wasn't where different pieces were put together. No, from one block, you make, this signifies the unity of all that Jehovah is attempting to do. It is to have 6 branches extending from its sides, 3 branches on the menorah on one side of it and 3 on the other. You see that in the depiction as well that we have here. On one branch ought to be 3 cups shaped like almond blossoms, each with a ring of outer leaves and petals. We see those here. On one branch ought to be 3 cups shaped like almond blossom, each with a ring of outer leaves and petals. Likewise, on the opposite branch, 3 cups shaped like almond blossoms, each with a ring of outer leaves and petals. And similarly, for all 6 branches extending from the menorah. On the central shaft, the shaft is right in the middle, it divides with the 3 on each side, are to be 4 cups shaped like almond blossoms, each with its ring of outer leaves and petals. So we see those coming up as well. The rings of outer leaves and their branches are to be one piece with the shaft. Thus the whole menorah is to be a single piece of hammered work made of pure gold. Make 7 lamps for the menorah. Lamps would be placed in that manner. And mount them so as to give light to the space in front of it. Its tongs and trays are to be of pure gold. The menorah and its utensils are to be made of 66 pounds of pure gold. So this pure gold would be lumped together into a single block, and then from that, this would be carved out. He goes on to say, see that you make them according to the design being shown you on the mountain. So Moshe is going to relay this exact information to the children of Israel, that I have seen this. And this is how we are going to make it. Remember, he's telling them that so he could dwell among. So whatever you're making, make it the best you're going to do it exactly as I tell you. And then I will dwell in that place. So they're going to have a place where the presence of the creator of the universe is right there in the midst. Not a statue. An actual glory, Shekinah glory in this place. Chapter 26. You ought to make the tabernacle with 10 sheets of finely woven linen and with blue, purple, and scarlet yarn. So we're going to see that depiction of the holy place. You ought to make them with cherubim or cherubim worked in that have been crafted by a skilled artisan. Each one is to be 40 feet long and 6 feet wide. 40 feet long, going and draped over the sides, 6 feet wide. All the sheets are to be the same size. 5 sheets are to be joined on one to another, and the other 5 sheets are to be joined one to another. Make loops of blue on the edges of the outermost sheet in the first set, and do the same on the edge of the outermost sheet in the second set. Make 50 loops on the one sheet and make 50 loops on the edge of the sheet in the second set. The loops are to be opposite one another. So you're putting these loops on the end, and you see those. We can see how those loops were then fastened to tent pegs to stretch this material out and make it in the form that would be most beautiful for something that can be what? Taken down and put back together. He goes on, verse 5, make 50 loops on the one sheet and make 50 loops on the edge of the sheet in the second set. The loops are to be opposite one another. Make 50 fasteners of gold and couple the sheets to each other with the fasteners so that the tabernacle forms a single unit. So this had to be put together in this fashion so that it formed, when it was all done, one single building, which is called the holy place. You ought to make sheets of goat hair to be used as a tent covering. How do we get a fly in here? A tent covering the tabernacle. Make 11 sheets. Each sheet is to be 45 feet long and 6 feet wide. All 11 sheets are to be the same size. Join 5 sheets together and 6 sheets together, and hold the 6th sheet double at the front of the tent. We see a doubling of this sheet that would be at the front and over the top. He goes on, make 50 fasteners of bronze, put the fasteners in the loops, and join the tent together so that it forms a single unit. As for the overhanging part that remained of the sheet forming the tent, the half sheet remaining is to hang over the back of the tabernacle. Now, those are the sheets that are at the very back of the tabernacle in the Holy of Holies, and how they will be draped down so that it forms the structure that Jehovah has designed. He goes on in verse 13, and 18 inches on the one side and 18 inches on the other side of that remaining in the length of the sheets forming the tent is to hang over the tabernacle to cover it on each side. So there will be overhang, and this overhang will be tied to tent pegs. You ought to make a covering for the tent of tan ram skins and an outer covering of fine leather. Make the upright planks for the tabernacle out of acacia wood. So you see that the structure that was holding all of these tapestries was made of acacia wood. Each plank is to be 15 feet long and 2 1/4 feet wide. They are to be 2 projections on each plank. The planks are to be joined one to another. That is how you ought to make all the planks for the tabernacle. So everything is made to the exact dimensions, and so that once it's formed, it will be formed into one unit. Make the planks for the tabernacle as follows: 20 planks for the south side. And we see a depiction here of what is the entrance to the tabernacle. Then we have actually the entrance would be on the east, and this would be the west, the back of it. This would be the north, and this the south. It says make 40 silver sockets under the 20 planks, 2 sockets under one plank for its 2 projections, so they would be tied together with these planks would be tied together with these projections, making the structure. And in this depiction that we have over here, I don't know if you can really see that, but in that are those planks tied together, forming the structure that will hold those coverings that go over this, the tabernacle. For the rear part of the tabernacle toward the west, make 6 planks. For the corners of the tabernacle in the rear, make 2 planks. These are to be double. So at the corners, you would double making a kind of like a L or a C that would then project, because it's a perfect cube. And so it would be like making a 90-degree angle at the 4 corners of this structure. Verse 24, they are to be double from the bottom all the way to the top but joined at a single ring. Do the same with the both of them. They are to form the two corners. Thus there will be 8 planks with their silver sockets, 16 sockets, 2 sockets under one plank and 2 under another. So at each corner are these planks that form the basic structure for this tabernacle. Verse 26, make crossbars of acacia wood. So now between that, we're going to put cross members to what? Strengthen this tabernacle that's going to be held, formed with acacia wood, and then overlaid with these curtains and different designs. The middle crossbar halfway up the planks is to extend from end to end. Overlay the planks with gold. Make gold rings for it through which the crossbars will pass, and overlay the crossbars with gold. So these cross members would be something like what they were using to hold, but this would hold the structure together and be tied off at the ends. You are to erect the tabernacle according to the design you have been shown on the mountain. Once again, you don't do it any kind of way. You do it the way Jehovah has instructed you to do it. Why? Because this is where he's going to make his presence felt. And it has to be, you're learning to be what? Disciplined to do in accordance to what he has instructed. You ought to make a curtain of blue, purple, and scarlet yarn and finely woven linen. Make it with cherubim worked in. They have been crafted by a skilled craftsman. So among these coverings are going to be, once again, these cherubim. So it's amazing because I'm not quite sure what they were to look like. We go on. Hang the curtain below the fastener, then bring the ark for the testimony inside the curtain. So here we see this curtain inside this tabernacle. And inside the tabernacle, we have this is called the holy place of the tabernacle. And here's the Holy of Holies, which was about 18 feet back, was the Holy of Holies. So the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant was, with the poles extending towards the curtain. The curtain was here that would separate these two rooms inside the tabernacle. You ought to put the table outside the curtain and the menorah opposite the table on the side of the tabernacle towards the south. Put on the table on the north, put the table on so they were opposite one another. You had the table, and then you had the menorah on the opposite side facing the table. And what they won't describe in this particular lesson was the table of incense. For the entrance to the tent, make a screen of blue, purple, and scarlet yarn and finely woven linen. It should be in colors the work of a weaver. For the screen, make 5 posts of acacia wood. Overlay them with gold and cast for them 5 sockets of bronze. So each one of these were also formulated with this wooden structure for which the curtain could be hung to separate the outside of these posts that were structuring it from the inside. Chapter 27, as we prepare to close our lesson for tonight. You ought to make the altar of acacia wood. Once again, you see this altar made of wood overlaid. 7.5 feet long and 7.5 feet wide. So it was a perfect square, 7.5 feet. So that's right about 78 inches, right about, no, close to 90. I'm sorry, 7 to be 84.5. So it's 90 inches. So it's a 90-inch square made of acacia wood. The altar is to be square and 4.5 feet high. So once again, 4.5 feet would be right about 54 inches. Make horns for it on its four corners. The horns ought to be one piece with it, and you ought to overlay it with bronze. So this screen that is going to be made, and these horns are going to be made together. Make for it a grate of bronze netting, and on the four corners of the netting, make 4 bronze rings. Put it under the rim of the altar so that the netting reaches halfway up the altar. So remember, it's what, 54 inches high. So then right at the midpoint, there's going to be something that is going to hold that screen in place, for which the sacrifice will be offered. And underneath that will be where the wood will make the coals for the fire that will burn the sacrifice. Says, put it under the rim of the altar so that the netting reaches halfway up the altar. Make poles of acacia wood for the altar and overlay them with bronze. And we see that transpiring right here. Its poles ought to be put unto the wings. The poles ought to be on both sides of the altar for carrying it. The altar is to be made of planks and hollow inside. They are to make it just as you were shown on the mountain. Verse 9. Here is how you ought to make the courtyard of the tabernacle. We see in this depiction the courtyard of the tabernacle. We see here the tabernacle, and here is the altar for the burning of the sacrifice. On the south side, facing the southward, ought to be tapestries for the courtyard made of finely woven linen, 150 feet on one side, 150 feet, supported on 20 posts and 20 bronze sockets. The hooks on the posts and the attached rings for hanging ought to be of silver. Likewise, along the north side ought to be tapestries for 150 feet long. So this courtyard was 150 feet long, and we're going to find out, and across the width of the courtyard on the west side, which is behind the tabernacle, is tapestries along that fence that they're going to make 75 feet long. So we find that the courtyard is 150 by 75, hung on 10 posts and 10 sockets. The width of the courtyard on the east side, facing east, will be 75 feet. So the entrance is 75 feet. The wall, the fence along it is 75 feet, but inside of that is going to be the gateway. The tapestries for one side of the gateway will be 22.5 feet long, hung on these 3 posts to 3 sockets. For the other side, there will be tapestries 22.5 feet long. So now we got a total of basically 45 feet. So that gateway is going to be about 30 feet. For the gateway of the courtyard, there is to be a screen 30 feet made of blue, purple, and scarlet yarn and finely woven linen. It should be in colors, the work of a weaver. It is to be on 4 posts and 4 sockets. All the posts all the way around the courtyard are to be banded with silver and to stand in sockets of bronze. The length of the courtyard is 150 feet and the width 75 feet. Everywhere with the height 7.5 feet. So remember what we said that was 7, 84.5, making it 90 inches tall. The tapestries and screens ought to be of finely woven linen, and the sockets ought to be of bronze. All the equipment needed for every kind of service in the tabernacle, as well as the tent pegs for the tabernacle and for the courtyard, are to be of bronze. That concludes our lesson for today. Now, here is a depiction of kind of what this, you see the 30-foot entrance with 15 foot on each side, so it would swing into the courtyard here, and the people could, in fact, see. And the first thing they would see is the altar. This is all that is mentioned in this particular lesson, but we'll get into the other parts of what fits inside the courtyard and what goes inside of the tabernacle in another lesson. So it may seem as if this is kind of a boring lesson, but when you understand what is going on and the fact that we are now the tabernacles for the dwelling place of the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, and we were set apart for this task and for this duty. And so therefore we are made in a perfect image of what it is to be a child of the King. And so with that, that's going to conclude our lesson for tonight. Let me get out of our shared screen. And let us pray the priestly blessing as we dismiss. May Jehovah bless you and keep you. May Jehovah make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May Jehovah lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Until we see each other on Wednesday night for our Wednesday night Bible study, Ephesians chapter 4, I say shalom.